Hello, and thank you for joining me. Today we're celebrating the feast of St. Luke the Evangelist. And if you haven't already done so, you might like to find on our website the Bible readings for today and read the short passages from Isaiah and Luke's Gospel that you find there. That's what I'm going to be talking about for the next few minutes. The Isaiah passage begins, "Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees." I'm not really sure how old Isaiah would have been when he wrote those words, but I have to say that as I get older and older, they do feel increasingly relevant to me. Of course, in Jewish culture in Isaiah's day, people usually prayed standing, hands raised to heaven. The practice of kneeling with hands clasped is much more recent. But it's hard for us, I think, not to see Isaiah's plea as one for help in his prayer life, and perhaps that's something we need at the moment too. But if you read on, he talks very definitely of physical healings, of blindness and deafness, of the lame and the dumb. And I'm sure that's why this passage has been chosen in the lectionary for today when we celebrate the feast of Luke, who is also known as the beloved physician. That description comes from Paul's letter to the Colossians. Luke was Paul's travelling companion for much of his journey, but the writer of the lectionary gives us a passage from 2 Timothy, which actually contains only 5 words about Luke. Only Luke is with me. And I have to say the rest of it is a thoroughly grumpy piece by Paul. Paul seemed to have a penchant for rubbing people up the wrong way and for falling out spectacularly with most of his other travelling companions. So it's to Luke's credit that he managed to stay with him. In one commentary I consulted, Canon Roslyn Brown imagines Luke's own version of those blunt 5 words. Luke, a servant of Jesus Christ and travelling companion of Paul, to Theophilus, beloved in the Lord. Having followed Paul around Asia and Europe, being shipwrecked, thrown out of cities, had to say goodbye to several travelling companions, sometimes after they fell out with Paul. We are in Rome. He is under house arrest, and I'm running around looking after him. Which I suspect conveys rather more of the reality of the situation than what Paul writes. And of course, we're familiar with Luke's writing style, both from his Gospel and from the Acts of the Apostles. And by the way, if we read through the Acts, we find that the grammar shifts from the third person to the first person plural after Paul's visit to Troas, which suggests to most commentators that Luke met and joined Paul there. And despite the hardships along the way, which we imagined Luke describing just a minute ago, and despite the irascibility of his companion, Luke stuck with him. He was clearly a man blessed with a grace and patience which few could manage. And the description of the beloved physician seems well earned. It's believed that Paul suffered from a chronic eye condition, as well as an unfortunate habit of getting himself stoned, flogged, shipwrecked, arrested, and generally maltreated by the people he'd upset. It seems it was Luke's role to patch him up afterwards and get him back on the road again. Now, tradition has it that Luke was a Gentile born in Antioch. He was clearly well educated, as witnessed by his writing and medical skills, and was probably already a Christian before he met Paul. As far as we know, he never married, but sacrificed home and any prospect of family life to travel with and support Paul, and to suffer significant risks and hardships along the way, but to offer the gifts he had, no matter what the cost, to facilitate nothing less than the spread of the good news of salvation across most of the then known world. Oh, and somehow along the way he found time and energy to record the life and teaching of Christ, as well as the actions of Peter and Paul and all the other apostles. Now, I suspect the passage from his Gospel is chosen for today because the mission of the 70 appears in none of the other Gospels. Numbers in Scripture are often more symbolic than mathematically precise. 70, or sometimes 72, represented in Jewish tradition all the nations of the world. The mission which Jesus gave symbolically to the 70 disciples to spread the gospel to the nations of the world, mirrors the words of Jesus to the apostles at the end of Matthew's Gospel. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. But there is nothing symbolic about Luke's vocation. He used his skills as physician and writer to ensure the spread of the gospel in reality to the greater part of the nations of the known world. Luke reminds us that vocation is not about being holy, but about using the gifts which God gave us in his service. Again, to quote Roslyn Brown, it's about putting up with difficult people, hanging in when it would be easier to drop out, keeping going, accepting changes in the direction of life when circumstances demand it. And I have to say that in the middle of a pandemic, that is clearly not going to go away anytime soon. That seems like a pretty good model for all of us today. Amen. Thank you for listening, and look forward to joining you again soon. Bye now.